All right, y'all. For this segment of book review, I am so excited. We are going to be talking about For the People, Black Socialists in the United States, Africa, and the Caribbean. Now, let me preface this by saying I am so sorry this book is so hard to get, but we are working on getting it republished. So hopefully sometime soon it will be more freely available. But let me just tell you a little bit about this book first. I'm going to read a section that summarizes what the book is about. So the author, Daryl Russell Grigsby, writes, the purpose of For the People is simple: to break the silence America has imposed on the achievements of Black socialists, and to convince the reader that struggle for change is both necessary and possible. Through struggle, revolutionary struggle, we can build a nation in which our children and their children will not go uneducated while space missiles circle the earth, a country where our grandparents will not starve to finance CIA skullduggery, and a society in which human beings are not warped by a culture which relegates human rights and dignity beneath private property and individual wealth. So this book just profiles the ways in which Black and African people have taken up socialism throughout the diaspora and used it for struggles for labor, for self-determination, for liberation, and for freedom. And so, y'all, I am so excited today because I'm joined by two special guests, Erica Caines and Noname. So let me briefly, these are people who need no introduction, but let me just go ahead and read their bios. So Fatima Warner, known professionally as Noname, is a rapper and book club creator from Chicago's South Side. She considers herself a student of the Black radical tradition and someone who aims to live a principled and honest life. Plus, she makes dope music, as we know. Erica Caines is a poet, writer, and organizer in Baltimore and the DMV. She is a coordinating committee and outreach team member of the Black Alliance for Peace, as well as an outreach member of the Black working class-centered Ujima People's Progress Party in Maryland. Caines is founder of Liberation Through Reading, a program that provides Black children with books that represent them, and created the extension, a book club entitled Liberation Through Reading BC, to strengthen political education online and in our communities. She is also the co-editor of the African Revolutionary blog Hood Communist, one of my favorite blogs to read. So welcome, Erica and Noname.
Hello.
Hey, y'all. Thank you so much. I'm so happy y'all are here to talk about this book, which is so good. I hope y'all loved it as much as I did.
Yes.
Yeah, it was amazing.
It really was.
So let me just start with the first question. How did y'all come to this book, and how did you go about reading it?
I was on your Instagram story, Dr. CBS, and I was like, "Oh, what's that?" And you sent it.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So that was pretty excited to have received it, because at the time I was actually making this year a focus of Caribbean works, like fiction, nonfiction, and just diving deeper into works in the Caribbean, because that is my background. And then when I seen that book, it was like right on time. So thank you.
And then, so when you read it, did you read it all in one sitting? Did you read it over a period of time? Like, how did you delve into it?
Well, when I read it, I read a few books at a time.
Me too.
Yeah. So I always try to complete a chapter a day, at the very least. So I did read it over time, but I think within 2-3 weeks I was done.
Yeah, dope. What about you, Fatima?
Similar situation. The extraordinary educator, academic, amazing host, YouTube. I was gonna say television.
I wish.
I watch it like it's TV. That's how much I watch Black Power Media. But yeah, I found it through your platform. I don't know if we were texting or if I just saw it on your IG. Maybe I saw it on your story and then I was like, what is this? I need to grab this. And then I ended up DMing Erica like, hey, we're reading the same book. So that's how I came to it. And then I started reading it alongside one of the book club picks for Black History Month, End of White World Supremacy, that Ajamu from Black Alliance for Peace, he picked that. So it was kind of cool to read it together, because End of White World Supremacy sort of starts off like chronologically telling the history of Black socialists in the 20th century, like from the beginning onward and stuff. So like towards the beginning, there was a lot about W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington and stuff like that, which I didn't really know that Booker T. Washington was damn near like an op. So that was very crazy to find out. I'm like, damn, he damn near was like really against radicals. So yeah.
And unions and immigrants. Yes. So y'all, I saw this book on Instagram too. One of the people I follow, his name is Schoolboy Charles. He's a white boy, but he cool. He with the shits. He's writing his dissertation about George Washington Woodbey, who is this one of the first. He's a Black socialist preacher, one of the earliest socialists at the end of the 19th century. And so he posted the book, and I was like, oh, I got to get that. So I found it. There was like 2 copies on Abe's books. I grabbed it, and so that's how I came to it. So some good things come out of social media, right? Like book recos.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna do a top 3. What are your top 3 takeaways from the book? Fatima, why don't you start?
Top 3 takeaways. I think the biggest takeaway was just how vast the Black socialist movement globally was. I'm kind of new to learning about a lot of the history when it comes to like Black radical socialists and communists. And I just had no idea that not only was there a plethora of Black socialists around the world, but that folks were also holding conferences and communing together and figuring out strategy and building like true Black internationalism and solidarity amongst, different factions and different groups. So I think that was the biggest takeaway. Probably the work of Marxist, I think she was a Marxist-Leninist, Claudia Jones. I still haven't read Left of Karl Marx. I know that that's like one of the big ones to read, but getting into her work reading the book sort of sparked me to actually going and reading her work specifically. And so kind of crazy to read about, I don't know if you would call it intersectional feminism, but how she sort of really goes into the Black woman laborer and how, because of the specific intersections as a Black woman and as someone who is a laborer oppressed under capitalism, there's a super exploitation that Black women are facing. So that was crazy to see that like years beyond where we are now when it comes to Black feminism, she was already doing this type of work. So yeah, that was one of the other ones. Come back to me.
So what about you, Erica?
The whole premise of like hood communists is that we believe that Africans or Black people are the true proletariat, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was refreshing to see that we didn't like make that up, that was something that was a running theme globally in socialist and Marxist and communist circles, and African, communist circles. That was the theme, that they understood that clearly, and they understood that because they were still up against white chauvinism. So that was another thing that like struck me, that was like, whoa, that's never going anywhere. That's always going to be something that's gonna keep coming up. And then I think the primary thing that stuck with me is that through each and every whether it was unions or vanguard parties or mass revolutionary parties, like mass struggle parties, they were emphasis on political education and organization, like always politically educating the masses before they even put a gun in their hands to do real struggle. They made sure there was a re-Africanization process, and they made sure that people understood where they were placed on class lines. So that was something that I could appreciate, because that's something that we push, join an organization, be educated. And when people push back, like it's not necessary, it's like, well, we have all of this history that shows, this is what the winning and working strategy is, collectively organizing and not any individual process. So yeah, so I thought that was something that stuck out to me, especially when we see online there's like this pushback against reading, right? Like, oh, you don't really need to read Marx. And
come on, when did reading become optional? Like, it's reading.
Yeah.
Reading?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Anyway. The reason why, like, I did the book club too, to like reemphasize that, like, if I'm gifting books to children, I know that there's a break where we really love books as kids and just stop reading when we're adults. So the book club in itself reissues that sort of emphasis of political education. So I really appreciated like how in each passage, that in each chapter that they talked about someone different, it was always an emphasis of political education.
So for me, first, it's just sort of like a practical thing. Like, he included a glossary, and I thought that was so dope because he defined like imperialism, capitalism, union, like all of these different words. So there was like a common way of approaching the text, because these things can mean different things to different people. So I thought that was super useful. The second thing is, like, I enjoyed learning about the women who are in like Frelimo, the MPLA, and the PAIGC. So for example, I just flipped to the page, like Rita Lumumba, who was a militant leader in Frelimo. So we know about the big people. We know about like Cabral and what is it? Aluta Continua. What is his name? Anyway, it's eluding me, but we generally know about the leaders of the party, the main men, but we don't know very much about the women. And so I enjoyed learning about, the women who were, and they weren't making no copies, they weren't babysitting the kids, they were on the front lines. And so I found that to be really, really educational. What's the third thing? The third thing that I learned is just the sheer diversity of Black socialism, right? That everybody was anti-imperialist for, the empowerment of Black workers, anti-capitalist, obviously, but there's a different way. There's manifold different approaches to the work. And so A. Philip Randolph is different than Maurice Bishop, who is different than Claudia Jones. So it just shows how every time I want to say capacious, I think about my friend who roasted me for saying capacious all the time. But anyway, Black socialism is just so capacious. There's something for everybody. So those are my 3 takeaways. So, after reading this book, what I learned about socialism that I didn't know before was mostly about unions. Like all the work that I do like macro theoretical work that more so looks at the broader structures like imperialism, neocolonialism, et cetera. And so I had less of a foundation in like the union organizing and the ways in which Black folks not only organized in the main unions like the CIO and AFL unions, but also had their own unions because of racism and even just because they wanted self-determination. And so the union angle was actually really, really informative to me. So what is something that y'all learned about socialism that you didn't know before, or the intersections of socialism and Black liberation, I guess?
Yeah. I was unions as well. I knew a little bit of it, especially in Detroit, but I did not know, hammer and hoe. I did know some background of it, but I did not know the expansion and how many unions existed all at once. So that to me was like eye-opening. But then also, you touched up on it, but the concept of African socialism, I think, was made broader for me. And just understanding the process, I think there was a closer look for me. Like, I don't think I've ever come across a text that really deeply described the process that they went through in their revolution. So like with the PAIGC, learning that they were not just on the front lines, but as they're doing the armed struggle against the Portuguese, they were still building. So even as meager as it was, there was still things happening in the background. So it wasn't just like they were just out in the jungle and doing guerrilla warfare. They were actually still trying to create programs in schools and health facilities and all these different things for the people in that, and that's as they were like going to these villages and politically educating the people and telling them sign on and join on, and more people did it. But I did like learning about that process, because I think before I might have seen it binary. There were people on the front lines and there were people doing this, but the way that it was explained in the text, that it was intermixed. the people on the front lines were also in the village, also building. You know, it was a back and forth, and everybody was involved in the struggle. So that was I thought was relevant for me that I didn't know before.
I think similarly, probably the unions. One thing that I thought was super interesting that I didn't know was as far as like, is it CPUSA, like the Communist Party USA? How even something that you would think that is rooted in, like, you know, obviously communism and Marxism, that it would already take a very radical approach in the way that they decided to organize and things that they organized around, but it was actually Black socialists within the party that pushed the party to actually adopt a more principled stance for the true lumpen proletariat, which would be Black people, like the people who would be the most exploited class within, I guess, the proletariat class would be the Black race. And so I didn't know that. So that was super cool to me to see that that's something that we contributed as Black people, and also a lot of the gains that we now have in our society as workers is in part because of all these Black socialists who unionized and fought. You know, like the things that I'm comfortably experiencing now is because of the work of Black socialists. So I didn't know that. I did not know that.
So y'all, we talking about these unions. I'm just going to read this little piece. This goes back to 1888. All right. So my work is in the 20th century, but even before that, even before the founding of the CPUSA, Black people were organizing. Right. So this says in 1888, 1 year after the massacre and lynch mobs in Louisiana, Black farmers in Texas created the Colored Farmers National Alliance. By 1891, 1.2 million Black members worked in co-ops and published newspapers and raised funds for Black school children. Like the all-Black locals in the Knights of Labor, their most powerful weapon was their labor. So we've been on this, you know, like, and so it is also interesting that, like, of course, the CPUSA and the Socialist Workers Party and other mainstream parties brought Black people in and Black people were attracted to them. But like, we also did our own stuff even before the rise of the Communist Party in America. So I think that's super dope. So who was your favorite person that was profiled in this book? And what was your favorite organization that y'all learned about?
My favorite person was Paul Robeson. I feel like I wanted to pick because there's so many names that I had never heard of. And I obviously have heard of Paul Robeson before, but it's almost actually reading his story. It's almost as if I had never heard of Paul Robeson because there just is so much to his legacy as an agitator, as a revolutionary artist that I had no idea. That resonated with me the most because I think that's, how I'm trying to move. So read a portion of it in the book about socialists, and then Charisse actually picked Here I Stand for Book Club. So I was able to read that and get an even better understanding of Paul Robeson. And the things that I just spout off on Twitter all day long is like the stuff that got this man's passport taken away from him by the state. You know what I mean? And didn't allow him to continue to travel and support his family and be financially stable. And I think one of the things that was just so cool about him to me was the fact that he was very specific about not just Black liberation, but liberation of all oppressed people, like really traveling to Europe and linking up with so many different other groups and sects that were experiencing oppression under imperialist capitalism. And so that was really cool to me. Also, his journey through, like, I don't want to call him a Pan-Africanist, but in his book, he sort of goes through this this process of like being in Europe and then hanging out with different African student unions and like kind of radicalizing himself as a Black person is now like, okay, I'm thinking about the continent. I'm thinking about not being a Negro, but I have autonomy as an African person. And what does that mean? Like for me to be an African socialist, a revolutionary artist. So he was definitely my favorite person. And then also in his book, he definitely was like just very kind of spicy, and I was not expecting
He got
that.
an attitude. He's sassy. He's not
Like, okay. So that was super dope. And then I know that it's probably common knowledge to you guys because you know this is your background more so, and I didn't know, but the PAIGC, Amilcar Cabral, that was my first time really reading about it, any of it at all, and that probably was my favorite organization just because the weight that the Portuguese, you know, the amount of not just financial pressure, but like militarized pressure that the Portuguese, I think it was like they said between different European governments and the UN, $500 million went into destroying this revolutionary party that existed in is it Guinea-Bissau?
Guinea-Bissau and in
Bissau.
and in Cape Verde. So the PAIGC just stands for the African Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde. And just so our people know.
So yes, I think that was one of my favorites. One, because of the fact that ultimately it seemed like and even though Amilcar was assassinated, they still continued to fight, and it was a 10-year like a 10-year war, you know. And the fact that also Amilcar was like very adamant about making sure that there was female leadership and not just creating a new society that didn't have any sort of like you know, Portuguese colonialism, but even he spoke about like even the things that existed within the African society that were no longer productive to like the, you know, upliftment of the people. Those things also need to be addressed, and I just thought that was super dope. And that was another thing actually that Paul Robeson did as well, was like in his analysis definitely critiqued Black leadership and the fact that more Black women were not put into those positions. So to see two Black men at that time adamantly, you know, riding out for Black women, I thought that was dope. So sorry, that was kind of long-winded.
No, it's cool. But here's the thing that's so dope about the struggle in Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. Portugal was under a fascist dictatorship at that time. It was because of that struggle in Africa that the regime, the fascist regime in Portugal, was overthrown, not the other way around, right? So we always hear about the Europeans leading to whatever consciousness in the African diaspora, but no, it was this liberation struggle that inspired people in Portugal to rise up and overthrow that fascist regime. And so it's like, you know,
oh wow,
we just out here inspiring, period.
It was hard for me to pick a favorite person. But one of the people that I did learn more about that I didn't actually know anything about was Jonathan Jackson. I'm
gonna pick something else. I was about to pick George Jackson, but I'm gonna pick somebody else now.
She took Amilcar and so I was like, oh
yeah.
Shit. Well, who else can I pick? But no, but no, I actually learned more about him because you know, George Jackson talks about his brother, but I don't think that I learned as much about him through George's writing as I did in this book. But also there was a quote. It wasn't so much somebody that stood out for me as an interesting person, even though, yes, but the quote was Hosea Hudson when he said in the 30s were the rough days that created a tough communist, men and women that went to their graves as communists. And that was something that, like, as I kept reading, because that's in the very beginning of the book, but as I kept reading, that just stuck with me because it was so prominent in the book. But then also, as a favorite organization, I would say Maurice Bishop in the New Jewel Movement.
That was my second.
Love Maurice Bishop.
That revolutionary beard, okay? There's this iconic picture of one of our elders like stroking his beard. I was like, that absolutely would have been me. I would have risked it all to just touch it one time.
Just to see how much they did in the span of time that he was alive to do it. Completely inspirational. And then I guess that's a viral speech now, but you know that he understood his power and his emphasis in not only being an African nation so close to the U.S., but an English-speaking African nation with ties to Cuba and ties to Nicaragua. He understood that he was a threat and the threat that he posed, but he still pushed forward. So yeah, and I know there's much controversy around his death and things like that. And I have gotten a chance to read Bernard Cord's book just for more further context.
Mhm.
Because Maurice Bishop Speaks absolutely hates Bernard Cord. So
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
just more context. But I always do enjoy reading more and more about that movement, especially since one, it's in my home region. Just to know that something like that was possible there and it did happen there, and how much of an impact it had on Black Americans here, because so many of the Panthers moved to Grenada during that revolution, and obviously had to come back when all of that erupted. But it was a big inspiration, and just to think of what could have been, it's all inspiring. And again, it's an organization, not even an organization, but just a mass vanguard party that put women first, put education first, put children first, and we see the fruits of that. So yeah. So
Yeah.
There's a really amazing documentary on that revolution on Afro Marxists on YouTube. So
hey, yo, shout out to Afro Marxists. I use so much content from that channel in my classes. I teach it, I watch it. I'll just be, washing dishes or doing some squats, listening to Kwame Ture. I need that revolutionary spirit to get me through it. But that's an amazing channel. So check that out, Afro Marxists on YouTube. Okay, so I was gonna do George Jackson, but I'm gonna do Abdul Rahman Mohammed Babu. So Babu, I have read a lot of Babu's some of his writings on socialism in Africa, but he was the leader of the Zanzibari revolution. There's a lot to say about Babu, but essentially he helped to build Ujamaa in Tanzania. He led the Zanzibari revolution. And he had a great relationship with Walter Rodney. He really moved Marxist Leninism from the African perspective forward. He actually came to the United States at a certain point after, Nyerere basically made him leave, but he came to the United States and was associated with the Institute for the Black World. He's just we don't know enough about him. And I just think that he has some of the best clarity on Marxist Leninism, especially from thinking from the locus of enunciation of the African continent. So, and then my organization, it's one I already knew about, but I always love to read about, the National Negro Congress, founded in 1936. I love the National Negro Congress. I felt like they did so much. Louise Thompson Patterson's piece, Toward a Brighter Dawn, where she first introduced the concept of triple exploitation, actually comes out of a panel or a caucus within the National Negro Congress. Their first meeting was in Chicago. My beloved Alpheus Hunton was part of it. So I just love the National Negro Congress. And there's a book about it, Death Blow to Jim Crow by Eric Gelman, that I highly recommend for folks to read, because the NNC was it was so good. And before A. Philip Randolph flipped, he was very integral. He was the first president, or I think the first or the second president. I think Max Yergin, who also flipped, was one of the presidents. Anyway, I love the NNC, great organization. So, okay, y'all. How is this text useful to the organizing, activism, or culture work that you're doing? Or I guess another way to ask that is what lessons can be drawn from this for the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I think when I first started learning about all of this, we're on 7 years now, probably. It was a big pushback because communism was not popular 7 years ago. Nobody was talking about socialism in the way that they are now. So a big struggle online for me to be Black people exist in communism. I was always screaming it. And this book kind of, they do. I never really had to say that. There's the history there that people have to engage. And also for me, there's this need to want to make Marxism white, particularly Marxism-Leninism. And we've seen so many examples of different Black Marxist-Leninists, from Claudia Jones to the revolution in Mozambique. That was a Marxist-Leninist revolution. Yeah. Right. So we just seen a whole bunch of different types of Marxism that existed within Black communism, that it's comforting for me as a Marxist Leninist, but also it's good to just point to that, you know, we weren't all just one way or one type. You know, everybody wasn't an anarchist, and everybody wasn't a Marxist Leninist, and everybody was, you know, but there was these common themes. For education,
right?
Them, you know, being in actual organizations was another. So I think that you know, helps a lot of my work, because those are the things that I emphasize: getting politically educated and joining an organization. And the book in itself shows that, you know, that is the winning formula. So that helps.
And by the way, now that you mentioned the revolution in Mozambique, the name I was trying to think of earlier, Aluta Continua, is Samora Machel. That is the name, because I rock with him, and I can't believe I forgot his name. But anyway, go ahead, Fatima.
I think one of the things I guess I could take away, because I'm not really so much an organizer. Like, I think I'm really just an artist trying to figure it out. But I think one thing that was really powerful to me to see, and that I can continue to apply, is just the power of the written word. You know, like, a lot of the folks who were in that book also, they wrote. Like, Paul Robeson wrote his own book. Angela Davis wrote her own book. Several members of the Black Panther Party, they made sure to, you know, jot down the history. And so I think, thinking about it as a writer, same with you know, Kwame Nkrumah and Amilcar Cabral, like several different people who were Claudia Jones, that were Marxist Leninists, that were Black revolutionary socialists. That is something that they committed themselves to. The list goes on and on. George Jackson, Assata Shakur. So that is something that I was like, damn. Not only were we, you know, going crazy as far as trying to dismantle imperialism and capitalism, but we were also like these very prolific and beautifully gifted artists, in my opinion, because I think writing is art generally. So that I want to carry with me and make sure that I'm always somehow entering into a space where my writing is radical, and I stay on that path. And if I do ever decide to, you know, hop more into the movement, I mean, I'm a part of Black Alliance for Peace, but it's such a online space that it doesn't really feel like I'm on it. No compromise, no retreat.
Period.
Yeah, we're all members. Yeah. So I think also just thinking about different things that worked in the past as well. I know that we are in a different historical climate, but one thing that was super cool was how much they had conferences, like the amount of gathering. I don't know that we do that. Like, now, maybe it does happen. I'm not in those academic spaces and organizing spaces, but that would be so dope to have now, just a bunch of Black socialists and communist organizations, and, you know, people who are more on the periphery like myself, really coming together at a fat ass conference somewhere in Africa, or, you know, somewhere across the diaspora, and really building, you know. So yeah,
they do it. So, like, for example, Venezuela, my homegirl Layla, who's on the show last week, they have cumbes they're trying to organize throughout the diaspora to bring, she was telling me about this, like, to build these types of spaces. And I think NETFA, also Bab, Ala, and PACA, is part of this process to try to build these Black this Black diasporic spaces. So I think, and I'm sure that there are many, many other formations. So for me, always what I take away from reading not only this book, but from books about any of my squad, is like the courage. And I feel like against extraordinary odds, extraordinary circumstances, some of their homies flipped. Like I talked about, Max Yergin flipped, A. Philip Randolph flipped, Ralph Bunche flipped, and then the informants, the turncoats, stool pigeons, all of that. Despite all of this, right? It's already an uphill battle, but then you have you have COINTELPRO, you have you have all of this state violence, harassment. They continued, period, right? They built collectives that supported each other. I call that mutual comradeship. But like they were doing this work here. Like and they knew what the risks were. Sometimes they didn't know the extent to it, but like, I just feel like courage is something that we have to have. We have to be able to risk like our lives and risk our comfort for others, right? And so I think their ethical commitment to the work is always inspiring. Like when I'm here, like, oh man, like it's hard. Like, it's like, bro, they was on ships, like you were saying, Fatima, they're on ships going to conferences. Okay. They weren't flying. They were like on ships for weeks. Like they were, they were getting their ass whooped by the cops. Like they were doing they were just doing work, and they were fearless, or even if they were afraid, they did it anyway. So like, I always am admiring of their courage and the way they had each other's backs and everything. So I think that's something, I think we're a little bit flimsy these days. I think we can have much more courage. Last question is, this book was written in the 1980s. I want to say 1987 to be exact. Let me check, y'all. Yep, 1987, the year I was born. If it were published today, what would you want to be included?
Probably different orgs that I fuck with. I fuck with Good Kid, Mad City out of Chicago. I think they have really amazing politics. I think they do good work. I always forget the specific acronym, but it's like, is it AARP?
AAPRP.
AARP,
the African People's Revolutionary Party. Yeah.
Their political education is fucking amazing. I don't know if I can curse on here, but I feel like every other
we can. Anyway.
Like every other day, I'm definitely on their YouTube learning so much through their programming. So I think the inclusion of socialist formations now that are Pan-African and that are actually really about it, would love to have some inclusion there. I didn't get to the very, very end of the book. Was Cornel West in the book? Was he referenced?
I don't think so. No, I don't think
does he consider himself a socialist? I also don't know that either.
I think so. I mean, I think he's a type of Marxist.
Marxist.
Yeah. Socialist.
Well, I think he's throughout the years done really incredible work and has contributed. So it would be cool to see like folks like him included as well.
Yep. What about you, Erica?
I struggled thinking about who would be included. Orgs, yes, but then also like a lot of this book sort of details that most of those revolutions were going to face some sort of neocolonialism. That's where the direction was heading post revolution. So I know the 80s sort of smashed a lot. I was thinking the Bolivarian Revolution, primarily the African Revolution. But that was one that I think that could be included with Chavez, and especially because of the significance that it had on the region, on all the African countries in that region. So that was one I was thinking that could be added. But I do agree with the All African People's Revolutionary Party because they remained consistent even through the 90s. So yeah.
Yeah. Of course, I want BAP. I love BAP, and we're a socialist organization, but also the Black Radical Congress. I know that they were definitely anti-capitalist. I can't recall if everybody identified as socialist. I think so, but it was a 1990s formation. It was short-lived. They were plagued by a bunch of internal stuff, but they came together, they gathered together, and they tried to revive like the Black liberation movement from an anti-capitalist perspective, and with varying degrees of success. And so I think we need to know more about the Black Radical Congress, because most of those people are still alive, right? And I think that we wait till people die to give them their flowers, or we wait till somebody has to rediscover some organization. We can be thinking with these people and talking to them about the struggles and the failures. So for example, I had a conversation with Barbara Ransby, who was one of the founders, about it. And she was very, she has some self-criticism and self-reflection in terms of the organization. And so I think that they would be a good group to include in here. Any final words about the book, about this conversation, or anything else, y'all, before we close it out?
Yes, I want to pull you and do some book recommendations. So they talked about Louise Thompson Patterson, but I do want to recommend Sojourner for Freedom. because they also mentioned Claudia Jones and a host of other Black women socialists in the U.S.
That's an amazing book. That book changed the direction of my dissertation. It's an amazing book. I love it.
And then, of course, Left of Marx.
Yeah.
It's a great book.
They mentioned Langston Hughes, and a lot of what they mentioned is in his I Wonder As I Wander. So this is a really good book. A lot of it is like, you know, he's a artist, so he plays with you a lot in the book. You're not sure which is fiction and which is really happened to him, but it does speak a lot to his sort of Marxist dippings when he was in Russia as well.
One related to that is called Letters from Langston, and it's all letters between Louise Thompson Patterson and Langston Hughes because they were best friends, and I just love that. I love revolutionary best friends, so that's a related book.
Yeah, they went to Russia together, right?
To what?
The Soviet Union together, was it?
Yes, and Spain. So they was just about that life. They was out there struggling. Yes.
Because this man is great, and you need to actually read the speeches. Wonderful man. Asada, of course, obviously. They talk about her. They sort of dead name her in the book, but I have to keep an account of the time that it was published. But a must-have, must-read. African Socialism. So admittedly, the first 2 chapters, I was very finger under each word because it's a lot of things that I was unfamiliar with. But the end is very clear. A deeper understanding of where the AAPRP is coming from and African socialism as a whole. And then lastly, when you were talking about the turncoats, left of the color line, this talks about a lot of the union busting that happened. It mentions a lot of the artists, Claude Bouquet. So this is a really, really good one as well. So that is all my book recs that I have that I wanted to throw in there that I think complement the book, that if you read the book, read those as well, and you get a fuller understanding of the people that they talked about.
Yeah. I just want to say, or Fatima, did you have anything else?
No, I mean, I wish the book was more readily available because I think it's a great history book that I think everybody should have. Every Black person should have on their bookshelf. Reading it during Black History Month was like, because it's just such a history book. I would say that I don't have any book recs. Liberating Library, the founder actually gifted me a copy of Discourse on Colonialism. So I'm about to start reading that. I can't really recommend it because I haven't read it, but it looks amazing. So
yeah, I miss us there. So follow the Noname Book Club, listen to Noname's music, Hood Communist, period. You must read Hood Communist. Do not miss Hood Communist Thursday. It is the precursor to Dope Fridays when my show drops. I just linked myself in there, whatever. Join BAP, join an organization. I of course am partial to BAP, but join an organization, get involved in your communities, like do work as you are reading this material. So thank you both. Thank you, Fatima. Thank you, Erica, for coming on the show to talk about this book. I hope y'all will come back again soon to talk about another book. We got to pick one though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.